Some people go their entire lives feeling like they're watching everyone else from behind a pane of glass. They smile in the right places. They nod along in conversations. But somewhere inside, there's a quiet, persistent thought that never quite goes away. Why do I experience things so differently from everyone around me? If you've ever felt that, even for a moment, even if you never said it out loud, stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what you're about to hear isn't another generic personality quiz. It's not about being an introvert or an extrovert, a type A or a type B. This is something deeper. Something most people never get explained to them in a way that actually makes sense. By the end of this video, you might understand a part of yourself that you've carried quietly for years, and never had the words for. The loneliness of being different. Here's something psychology rarely says out loud. Being rare isn't always a gift. Sometimes it feels like a burden. People with this kind of mind often spend their childhood being told they're too sensitive, too intense, too much, or, just as often, too distant, too quiet, too in your own head. They learn early that the way they process the world doesn't match the people around them. So they adapt. They mask. They perform a simpler version of themselves just to make others comfortable. And here's the part that stings the most. Most of them never realize that the thing they were taught to hide is actually rare. Valuable. Almost extinct in a world that rewards speed over depth, and noise over silence. Deep down, they're not broken. They're just built differently. So let's talk about what that actually looks like, not in vague horoscope language, but in real, lived, everyday moments. Because if even 3 or 4 of these resonate with you, it's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. And patterns are what psychology is built on. Why rare doesn't mean what you think. Before we go further, let's clear something up. When psychologists talk about a rare personality, they're not talking about being weird for the sake of being weird. They're talking about a specific combination of traits that rarely exist together in the same person, because, biologically and socially, they tend to pull in opposite directions. Think about it. Most people are either highly logical or highly emotional. Most people are either deeply private or socially expressive. Most people either crave structure or crave freedom. But every so often, someone exists who holds both ends of the spectrum at once. Someone who can be ruthlessly analytical and achingly empathetic in the same breath. Someone who can sit in silence for hours, then suddenly say something so insightful it stops a room. That contradiction, that's the rarity. And it's exhausting to live inside, because the world doesn't have a simple box for it. Let's go through the 7 signs. Sign number 1, you feel emotions in layers, not in single notes. Most people experience an emotion the way you'd hear a single note played on a piano. Anger. Sadness. Joy. One note, then it fades, then the next one comes. But if you have this kind of mind, emotions don't arrive one at a time. They arrive as chords. You can feel happy for a friend's success and a quiet ache of being left behind, and guilt for feeling that ache, and curiosity about why you're feeling all 3, all within the same 10 seconds. Psychology suggests this isn't emotional instability. It's emotional density. Your nervous system processes more data per moment than the average person's does. It's not a flaw in your wiring, it's a higher resolution. The hidden reason this happens is something called high emotional granularity. The ability to detect subtle differences between feelings that most people would just lump together as, I feel bad, or, I feel good. You don't feel bad. You feel a specific, layered, textured version of bad that you could probably describe in 3 different ways if someone asked you to. Most people never ask you to. So you stopped explaining. You just learned to carry it quietly. Sign number 2, you replay conversations long after they've ended. You know the moment. You're lying in bed, the lights are off, the day is technically over, and suddenly a conversation from 6 hours ago, or 6 years ago, plays back in your mind like a film reel. Not because you're obsessive. Because your brain is still trying to extract meaning from it. What many people fail to understand is that this isn't anxiety in most cases, it's pattern seeking. You're not stuck on what was said. You're stuck on what it revealed. About the other person. About yourself. About the dynamic between you. This is where things become interesting. People with this trait often catch micro shifts in tone, body language, or word choice that completely fly past everyone else in the room. A slightly delayed response. A word chosen instead of another. You noticed it in real time, but you didn't say anything, because pointing it out would have made you, the weird one who reads too much into things. So instead, you process it later. Alone. In the quiet. Turning it over and over like a stone in your hand until it finally makes sense. That's not overthinking. That's depth processing in a world that only rewards speed. And here's something worth pausing on. The people who replay conversations this way are usually the same people who give the most thoughtful responses days later. A friend mentions an offhand comment about feeling stuck in their job, and weeks afterward, you're the one who remembers it, who brings it up again, who asks the follow-up question nobody else thought to ask. Not because you're keeping score. Because you actually absorbed what they said the first time, instead of letting it pass through you like background noise. Sign number 3, you can be alone for long periods without feeling lonely, but you crave deep connection when it's real. This one confuses people the most, including the person experiencing it. You're not antisocial. You're not avoidant. But there's something in you that genuinely recharges in solitude. Not because you dislike people, but because most social interaction feels shallow compared to what you're capable of experiencing with another person. Small talk drains you. Not because you're arrogant. Because your mind is built for depth, and small talk is the conversational equivalent of wading in ankle-deep water when you're built to swim in the deep end. But then, every once in a while, you meet someone. A conversation that goes somewhere real. Where you talk about fears, dreams, half-formed theories about life that you've never said out loud to anyone. And in that moment, something in you lights up in a way it never does in ordinary conversation. That's the contradiction again. Comfortable alone. Starving for depth. Most people assume those two things can't coexist in the same person. They can. And if you felt this, you already know it's true. Sign number 4, you notice what other people miss, and it's exhausting. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly known something was off, before anyone said a word? You picked up on the tension in someone's jaw. The forced laugh. The way two people who used to sit next to each other are now sitting on opposite sides of the room. Nobody told you any of this. You just knew. This is a trait psychologists associate with heightened interpersonal sensitivity, an almost involuntary radar for emotional undercurrents. It's incredibly useful. It's also incredibly tiring, because you're constantly absorbing information that other people simply don't register. The hidden cost is this: you often end up managing other people's emotions before they've even acknowledged them. You soften the mood in a tense room without anyone asking you to. You check in on the friend who insists they're fine, because you saw the flicker in their eyes that said otherwise. And almost nobody thanks you for it, because they don't even realize you're doing it. To them, it just looks like things worked out. To you, it costs something. There's a particular kind of fatigue that comes from this, the kind that has nothing to do with physical tiredness. You can leave a 2-hour family dinner feeling like you ran a marathon, not because anything dramatic happened, but because you spent the entire time quietly reading the room, adjusting your tone to keep the peace, sensing the one relative who was about to bring up something painful and gently steering the conversation elsewhere. Nobody saw you do it. That's the point. The work of an emotional radar is invisible by design. And invisible work is the easiest kind of work for the world to take for granted. Sign number 5, you question things most people accept without thinking. This is the sign that often gets you labeled as difficult growing up. Someone says, "That's just how it's always been done," and instead of nodding along, something in you quietly asks, "But why?" You don't ask to be rebellious. You ask because accepting things without understanding them feels almost physically uncomfortable to you. You need the why behind the what. Rules without reasons feel like walking blindfolded. What many people fail to understand about this trait is that it isn't disrespect. It's a refusal to live on autopilot. While most people move through life accepting inherited beliefs, about money, relationships, success, even who they're supposed to be, you've probably spent years quietly dismantling and rebuilding your own beliefs from scratch. That process is lonely. Because the people around you are still operating on the default settings you've already questioned and moved past. Sign number 6, you feel things deeply, but you process them privately. This one is the most misunderstood of all 7. From the outside, you might look calm, composed, even unaffected. People sometimes describe you as hard to read or mysterious, not realizing that what's actually happening is the opposite of indifference. You feel everything. You just don't perform it. Deep down, there's a quiet belief, maybe formed in childhood, maybe formed after being misunderstood one too many times, that your inner world is too much for other people to hold. So you learn to carry it alone. To process it in journals nobody reads, in long walks nobody joins, in 2 a.m. thoughts nobody hears. This isn't coldness. It's self-containment born out of self-protection. And the irony is brutal. The very depth that makes you so capable of understanding others is the same depth that makes you feel like no one could ever fully understand you. Sign number 7, you're drawn to meaning, not just achievement. The final sign is the quiet thread connecting all the others. Most people are taught to chase milestones, the job title, the relationship status, the next achievement to check off the list. And you can chase those too. You're often good at it. But somewhere along the way, a different question starts to dominate: does this actually mean something? You can have external success and still feel an unsettling hollowness if it doesn't connect to something deeper: growth, truth, contribution, understanding. Status alone has never been enough to satisfy you, even when you wanted it to be. This is where things become interesting. This trait is one of the rarest of all 7, because meaning-seeking requires a level of self-awareness most people never develop. It requires being willing to sit with uncomfortable questions instead of numbing them with distraction. If you've ever felt unsatisfied despite having it all on paper, that wasn't ingratitude. That was your mind refusing to settle for a life that looks good instead of one that feels true. So here's the question worth sitting with. If you recognized yourself in 3, 4, 5 of these signs, what does that actually mean? It means you've likely spent years being slightly out of sync with the world around you. Feeling things others didn't seem to feel. Noticing things others didn't seem to notice. Questioning things others simply accepted. And somewhere along the way, you probably learned to shrink that part of yourself. To round off the edges. To laugh a little louder at the surface-level joke instead of saying the deeper thing you were actually thinking. To say, "I'm fine," because the truth felt like too much to unpack in a hallway conversation. Psychology suggests that people with this kind of mind often go undiagnosed, unnamed, and unseen for most of their lives, not because something is wrong with them, but because there's no convenient label for person who feels too much, thinks too deeply, and notices too much to ever feel fully ordinary. But here's the truth that matters more than any label. The very traits that made you feel different are the same traits that make you capable of things most people never reach. Real empathy. Real insight. Real connection. Real meaning. The world doesn't always reward depth quickly. It rewards speed, certainty, simplicity. And so people like you often feel like you're moving at the wrong pace, in the wrong direction, towards something nobody else seems to be running toward. You're not behind. You're just early. Early to questions other people haven't even thought to ask yet. Think about it for a second. Every major shift in how people understand themselves, emotional intelligence, mental health, authenticity, boundaries, started as a strange or overly sensitive way of looking at the world before it became common language. Someone had to feel it first, name it first, sit alone with it before it had a vocabulary. That discomfort of being early isn't a malfunction. It's the price of perceiving something before everyone else catches up to it. This is also why people with this kind of mind often struggle with comparison. You look at peers who seem satisfied with simpler answers, a stable routine, a predictable life, contentment that doesn't ask too many questions, and some part of you wonders if you're making things harder than they need to be. You're not. You simply can't unsee what you've already seen. Once your mind has noticed the deeper layer beneath something, there's no going back to experiencing it on the surface again. The powerful truth. Most people spend their whole lives trying to fit into a personality that was never really theirs. They adjust. They shrink. They mute the parts of themselves that don't get instant validation. But rarity was never meant to be comfortable. It was never meant to feel like belonging in every room. It was meant to feel exactly like what you've been feeling, slightly apart, slightly different, slightly more aware than the moment requires. And maybe that's not a flaw to fix. Maybe it's a depth to finally stop apologizing for. If even one of these 7 signs felt like someone was describing a part of you that you've never had words for, that's not a coincidence. That's recognition. And recognition is the first step toward finally understanding yourself instead of constantly questioning yourself. If this description felt surprisingly accurate, you're not alone, even though it probably feels that way most days. Let us know in the comments which of these 7 signs hit closest to home. Sometimes just saying it out loud, even in a comment section full of strangers, is the first time people feel truly seen. And if you enjoy psychology, self-discovery, and understanding the quiet parts of yourself that the world rarely explains, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from.